Okay, so if you listen to Michaela, she told you within a day she was being taught things. So we have certain skills and knowledge that have to be done right away. We call those survival skills. Okay? They have to be taught in the first days after someone's diagnosed. Sometimes if they're in the hospital, we do it then. And then there'll be follow-up once they get out. Usually they're going to meet with a dietitian, might be a nurse educator, that are the usual in the hospital, or in a large clinic. In the endo clinic at kids, they have, at children's, they have numerous dietitians, nurse educator, and they have a PharmD that also works with that group. And they do, if they can do the education in the hospital, they will, because they'll have the family there. And often since we were a tertiary hospital, lots of people coming from long distances, so we would get a lot of that done. So on page 1, these are the immediate treatment goals and survival skills. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get their blood sugar below 180, okay? Because, why would we do that? They're not going to be symptomatic anymore, or their symptoms will go down quite a bit, so that just makes them feel better. Okay. We don't take them to normal because the risk of hypoglycemia would be very high. So we just want to keep them asymptomatic, get the body will tolerate that level of blood sugar longer than it would if we drove them down to 100. So we're going to relieve symptoms. In children, we're going to want to help them regain weight loss. So in kids, it's a whole different ballgame than older because they're developmentally, their brain, their body is still developing, so we want to restore some of that since they have lost quite a bit. We're going to go over insulin administration, most important. Depending on how old the child is, then the parents may be the ones learning this versus like Michaela, she can do that. So if they're mid-teen and up, then they can learn their own insulin administration. So you can see if you got a 2-year-old, then the parents are going to be doing that for long periods of time. We also want them to self-monitor blood glucose. They have to be able to check blood glucose because everything they used to do without thinking, now they have to think about everything. So think about all the things you do that you don't even think about. Do you eat when you want? Pretty much. Do you sleep in when you want? No. Do you get up when you want? Well, when you can sleep in. Do you think about when you go out and exercise? Probably not. So all those things you do nothing and think nothing about, now you have to think about. It can wear you out. Did it wear you out, Michaela? Yeah. Wears you out. It turns your world upside down. Everything that was taken for granted is now becomes a job. So we need them to be able to check their blood sugar because they need to start understanding what their body is doing. So they will feel different ways. So we need them to be able to recognize when their blood sugar is low. We need to help them to recognize when their blood sugar is high. Patients will tell me, oh, I can tell. I know when my blood sugar is a certain way. You can take it and they'll go, well, I would have thought it was this. You can deceive yourself. So we want them to be able to check to verify where their blood sugars are. So that's one thing, so they can start understanding themselves. The other thing is we need them to be able to, if they think they're low, verify they're low and treat. The other thing we do is we use those numbers to help guide us our treatment. So we will modify their insulin based on those numbers we get. And eventually, probably where Michaela is, she can manage it herself. She understands the goals, she understands what her body does, she understands carb counting, she understands her insulin. She can start to make those decisions herself. One of the early, and I think still one of the best models for patient-centered care is diabetes. And a lot of it comes off of that DCCT trial that I told you about. When I was at OU, I was in we had a interdisciplinary group, and we took students from all different disciplines and we put them into clinical care so they could start to understand what other people do. But before we did that, we said, okay, draw a medical team or just draw diagrams of what you think medical care is like and how people are related, because they had already been in a team, and so we said, okay, how does this team work? Medical students without anything is that medical student. Nurse, pharmacist, patient, social worker, we had dentist. Who's in the center? Okay, so they can't help themselves, it's the way they're taught. And we do that a lot in medicine, is we make you feel like you're the responsible party, you're in the center, you're driving the train. No, you're not. So in diabetes care, it is all about the patient. They have to make the day-to-day decisions. You're not going to go home and live with them. So with the patient, it's the physician, the PA, the nurse practitioner, it's family, it's the pharmacist, it's the nurse, it's the dietitian. All of these things, it's a team. Patients in the middle, it's where we want them. They have to make the decisions. And so we're going to do whatever we can to continue to empower them and help them to the best of their ability and to the best of their motivation to be the best care providers for themselves that they can be. Okay? That's what the DCCT taught us. That's the way I approach these patients. I am trying to help you manage your disease because I'm not going to be with you more than 0.5% of the year. Okay? Do you feel like they did that for you? Did you feel like when did you feel like you moved into this?
Right away when they got me into the endo the next day. So I have my primary care, my endo, and then I have 2 PAs at my endo. And I work with all of them like the same now.
Okay. Do you feel like they were always trying to move you towards independence?
Yeah.
Okay.
Immediately, because I had to go back to college. This was over the summer. I had 3 weeks to learn everything.
Did your mother freak?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
told me you're not going back. I said, yeah, I am.
Good for you.
But I had to teach my roommates stuff too.
Mm-hmm. Sophia, so this is where diabetes education is really important, because that's what we do in diabetes education. We teach them all these skills, that's why it's called diabetes self-management education. Okay, that's the goal, and that's where they need to be. We also are going to teach them urine testing for ketones. So if they have had, let's say they've had an admission for ketoacidosis, and early on we want them to be able to monitor, because if their blood sugars get above 250 and they stay there, they are very likely to produce ketones. People can get into ketoacidosis within 24 hours. So it's a quick thing, and people can die from it. So we want them to be monitoring, we want them to be aware, we want them to know what to do. If this happens, who do you call? Where do you go? How quickly do you need to do that? We also teach them about, we teach the family members also, how do you recognize a low? How do you treat a low? If somebody's unconscious with a low, which can happen, your brain does not get enough sugar, then you become unconscious. So we can teach them how to use glucagon, family members, to inject that. It's a muscle injection. You have to mix it and inject it. I'll show you some pictures later on today. We teach them sick day rules. When you get sick, your counter-regulatory hormones go up. So your glucagon goes up, your cortisol goes up, your epinephrine, all your stress hormones go up. And even if you're not eating, your blood sugar stays high because of all those hormones. So you have to test differently, you have to eat differently, you have to use your insulin, even when you're not eating. okay? That's what gets people into DKA more often than anything else. I'm sick, I don't feel like eating. If I'm not eating, I shouldn't be taking my insulin, okay? Does your body quit giving you insulin when you stop eating? It doesn't. So they can't do it either, but they'll get that in their mindset. Doesn't it make sense? It's logical. I'm not eating, I don't need insulin. Well, that's when they get into trouble. So we teach them, here's what you do when you're sick. We tell, or this is what I tell my folks, we're going to have an emergency packet. In your house, you're going to keep crackers, applesauce, gelatin, things that are ginger ale, Sprite. You're going to keep simple carbs around. And if you get sick, we're going to activate that sick bag. Okay? So we tell them, keep a list, but always make sure you've got enough supplies around that you can check your blood sugar. Don't run out of medicine. And be prepared if you get sick, especially when we're moving into flu season. I'm always talking to the patients, okay, have you got your sick day stuff already? Have you got that in your house? Always had to do it with our patients because they ran out of food. So it's like, keep crackers and don't touch it unless you need to. Okay. What did you learn about sick day?
I have like a little tub of stuff too, and it has like instructions on what to do, and then I also have the ketone testers.
Perfect, perfect. You have been taught well.
I think so too, yeah.
That's good, very good. Okay. So that is immediate goals, that's survival skills. Now the long-term treatment goals, so what we teach them here gets them their symptoms under control and helps them to feel better and keeps them out of emergency situations. That's what we're trying to do with those. Survive. The long term is we want to prevent complications. So those complications are 10 to 15 years down the road, more than likely, or longer, but day-to-day control matters, it counts. So then we want to move them towards the prevention of that. So we want to get as near euglycemic as we can. We want to maintain those normal or near normal hemoglobin A1C. We want kids to develop. If you're a 2-year-old and you get DKA, we want to make sure your brain develops normally, that you grow normally, that you can achieve everything you want to. We want to prevent their macrovascular and microvascular, so keeping their blood sugars under good control, good diets. Now we ask people who have diabetes to eat healthy diets. The same I would tell you as if you came to see me and we talked about your diet. We used to ask people with diabetes to eat really weird and strange, and it was hard for them. And teenagers have a lot of trouble because of the peer pressure. They want to eat whatever their peers are eating. They want to drink alcohol. Well, you have to deal with that. How do you do that? How do you make them feel not normal or not other? And we want to prevent low blood sugar. How did you feel when you went back to college? Did you feel weird?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was, because I was still learning about it, so it was a big difference. And I lived in a sorority and our food was like pasta like every week, so that's
Okay. So how did you deal with that? What coping skills worked for you?
Not giving into like peer pressure, like I had to buy my own food, and I kept my own fridge full of food.
What were negative skills you ended up reverting to, or what caught you? Where were the things that were really hard for you?
I think just like social situations, like everybody's going out to party and I need to figure out what I'm gonna do.
Okay, good. Okay, really good, because when Dr. Britton was talking to you yesterday about problem solving, that's what they're talking about. So when patients would come back, I never looked at mess ups as you're not doing what I tell you. It's opportunities to learn. It's like, okay, so that didn't work, so what would you do the next time? You know, what could you do? What do you want to do? Well, I want to avoid, what would you want to avoid? If you were going to go out, what was the worst thing that could happen?
A low blood sugar and then not being able to respond to it, and being with people that also didn't know how to respond to it. So
Okay.
I had to go out with friends that understood.
Okay, so you take that desire they have and what they're wanting to avoid and ask, okay, how can you accomplish that? So you're more asking the questions, asking them, they're doing the problem solving. And when they come back, you go, well, how did it work for you? And so you're listening to them, they're verbalizing, and they can start to say, well, this is what I would think I could do differently. As a medical provider, you can say things from a medical standpoint that you think may help, or you may want to avoid, or think about this when you do that. Or if you want to drink, how can you do it responsibly and not get into trouble? So we can teach them that. So that's when he's talking about problem-solving skills, you do that. I used to do what I called rehearsing with patients. Since I dealt with African Americans, the Sundays were a real problem, and the other were family reunions. So we would rehearse. Okay, you're going into the hall, and what's the first thing that's going to cause you trouble? Well, Miss So-and-so is going to drag me over here, and they're going to want me to do this. Okay, well, how do you want to respond? So we would rehearse the situations, and I would tell them, rehearse it again before you go home, or before you go. So those kinds of techniques help patients in a safe environment, without judgment, make a plan. And plans will always go awry, but you just work with them. You always learn. You will learn more from what you do wrong than when you ever do right. Right just reinforces doing certain things. Anything you want to add?
I have a quick question. How long does insurance cover like dietitian services? Is it continual or is it more in the beginning just to learn?
I don't know for kids. I would imagine with kids it's probably different. Medicaid, I would imagine that is not so much a problem. For adults, it depends on your insurance, but most insurances follow Medicare. Medicare will pay for 10 hours of diabetes education and 3 hours of a dietitian in the first year. After, from the time you start till the 1 year hence. After that calendar year, they will pay for, I think they'll pay for 3 hours, 2 hours of education, and maybe another 3 hours of MNT. I forget what the follow-up year is. So it is available, and most insurances will pay some, the good ones. They'll follow Medicare, what Medicare does.
I just saw a dietitian that first week.
Okay. How far away were you from your physician when you went to college?
2 hours.
2 hours. So how did you do follow-up? Did you have a phone number? Did you have
I could call them, but I would follow up every 3 months on like a Friday that I could get out of class. But I got a doctor at our health clinic too.
Okay.
They work together.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. Okay, so long-term goals of diet in type 1. One is adequate calories. If we need to have them gain weight, then we may change that for a period of time. So you have to have enough calories. So again, we don't feed them because we're giving them insulin, but there's got to be adequate calories for the insulin that they are using. We want to normalize their blood sugars, their lipid levels. We don't want them to have these huge excursions after they eat because it makes them feel crappy and it raises their A1C. We want to prevent cardiovascular disease and adequate nutrition. Doesn't that sound like the goal for most people? So it's not that odd, not anymore. We've moved it towards most people need to be similar. Okay, so the elements of management on page 3. So to accomplish these, we usually need to move people towards multiple injections of insulin a day. So traditional, what people would refer to as traditional, is 2 injections a day. 2 injections a day in a type 1 will never accomplish the goals, A1C goals. They'll usually get you to an A1C of about 8 or 9%. So in order to achieve that 7% or less, you need intensive insulin therapy, and that requires 3 to 5 injections a day or more. But that's about normal, would be 3 to 4, would be more normal. Okay. With that, we using a basal insulin and insulin before they eat a meal, we can accomplish those goals that we have set out. We also need daily blood glucose monitoring. You cannot use insulin and have a person who will not monitor. It's just a nightmare. Type 1s, you can't do it. Type 2s they're more difficult sometimes to motivate to get them to do it, but type 1s have to do that. Careful balance of diet, exercise, activity, and insulin dosing. When people first hear this, it overwhelms them. What I try to get them to see in the short run is that yes, it's a whole set of new skills to learn, but eventually we want you to be a person who has diabetes. We don't want you to be a diabetic who happens to be human. See the difference? The focus is on, I'm a person and I have diabetes, okay? I'm a person, people have all kinds of stuff. Every one of you in here could say, I'm a person and here's the things I have that I have to deal with. Not to minimize diabetes at all, but we want them to enjoy being human. And these other skills just become part of life. This is how I live, this is how I do. Do you feel like you're there? Yeah, she's a human. She's a human with diabetes, okay. So education plan of action for the patient to make adjustment in diet, activity, insulin dosing to achieve normal blood sugar control. Depending on the age of the person, the family may need more support. Depending on the person, they may need more support. I'll tell you, she is an exception. She's smart, she was determined, she was motivated, she had support. Most people will not be that way, okay? Most people, I would say you are at the extreme. You're more than 2 standard deviations out. So you would hope for everyone to be like that. But most of them will be somewhere in between total dependence to total independence. And then we'll individualize their blood glucose targets depending on their age. For children, we are not as rigorous because we don't want the hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia has very negative effects on their brain and neural development. So when we get to talking about their goals of therapy, we'll see that their A1C goals are higher. It's a blessing in that most of the time we say that the complication clock does not start until they go through puberty. So young kids usually, even if they've had diabetes for 10 years, they rarely show any signs of complications if there are 2 at 12. But when puberty starts, then we start looking, and you'll see the difference in when we're screening for those complications when we get to that in the next hour or so. We don't start screening them right away like we do with type 2. We don't screen them for 5 years or so for complications. Okay. So the components of insulin replacement are basal and meal related. Okay. So basal bolus insulin. Now, I'll make this disclaimer. I don't deal a lot with type 1s all the time. I'd say out of my practice, they were probably 20% of who I had and 80% were type 2s. And I do adults, I don't do children. So I'm giving you basic concepts. If you go into a practice that does more type 1, they may do it a little bit differently. But these concepts are pretty close. We'll let Michaela give you some feedback on that too. So usually what you're going to determine their total daily dose need. Okay? And we do that based on weight. And I've given you, it's probably on the next page. So we're going to base it on units per kilo, based on what a normal person would need without diabetes. Patients with type 1 are insulin sensitive. So their insulin sensitivity usually is the same as someone who does not have diabetes. Type 2, whole nother ballgame. Okay? So we can replace them on a weight basis just like the weight base that you produce if you don't have diabetes. The basal usually will make up 50 to 70% of your total daily dose. When I start someone, I start them on 70% basal because it is less likely to cause them to be low, and it keeps their blood sugars more even, keeps it more asymptomatic, less likely to have a low. The bolus is 30 to 50%. I'll say that most type 1s I have worked with usually move more towards that 50-50 as they move along. It's also based on the amount of carbohydrate to begin with. So you heard her say she learned how to carb count. We base the insulin amount on the amount of carbs that you're taking in. So they have to learn right away how much, what is a carbohydrate and what constitutes a serving. That's why I went over it with you the first day. Go back and look at that. A unit of insulin will cover about 15 grams of carb. We call that an insulin to carb ratio. I don't know if I put that in there, you may want to make a note. Be designated like this, insulin to carb ratio. 1 to 15 means 1 unit of insulin will cover 15 grams of carb. The more we work with the patient, we may fine tune that. Early on, they may need a unit for every 20 grams that they eat because they're still producing a little bit of insulin. But this is where we start. And then we'll fine tune it. And people change their insulin sensitivity to carbs changes throughout the day. They may do 1 to 10 for breakfast, 1 to 15 for lunch, and 1 to 8 for supper. But that's something that comes over time. This is where we start. So we'll put them on a basal dose. So we do the, I'm getting ahead of myself. So we will do percent of total daily dose. So we'll start with 15 to 25% before breakfast. Why did I put this down? Let me think. Let me skip that and come back to it. I'm not quite sure why I wrote that. Let's go to the next page. Okay, so going down to number 1. So we have to replace all the insulin they produce. So most of you produce in the range of 20, if you're really thin or skinny, 20 to 40 units a day. That's what you produce. So we need to reproduce that and then replace all of it. So on average for adults, it's a 0.5 to 1 unit per kilo per day. Need to just commit that to memory. Most of the time, we'll start on the low end. At children's, they usually start at about 0.6, but we're going to start with 0.5. 0.5 units per kilo per day is their total daily dose. So you'll see with children average a little bit lower, 0.4 to 0.8 units per kilo per day. Adolescents, because of hormone changes, they are usually in the 1 to 1.5. As they approach 20 or so, they will go back down to that 0.5 to 1 unit per kilo per day. Is that similar? Have you ever figured yours out on a weight basis?
I'm doing it right now.
Do you mind telling us how many injections a day you take?
I do about 4.
4, and you do 1 basal?
Yeah.
And 3?
Mhm,
Do you
before
ever
meals.
cover your snacks?
I don't snack a lot, but I would if it was high carb,
Okay,
bad carb.
okay. Go back to your original dose and your weight, if you remember at that time, and tell me what your unit per kilo per day was.
I haven't changed at all,
Oh, okay.
for the
That's pretty good.
dose and stuff. So what do you want exactly
What's your unit per kilo per day?
per kilo? I don't know. I know my ratio is 1 to 5.
Your insulin to carb?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. Did they start with 1 to 15?
I don't remember. I think I've always been 1 to 5. Because
Really?
it's always been really easy to figure out.
Okay, so
I know people that are 1 to 7, and I can't imagine doing that math.
She's odd. Most people are, this is where we start. Okay, so we're gonna start here. But she's giving you example, it's individualized, which she's told you 1 to 7, 1 to 15. Okay, so let me go through these principles. So we always use a combination of basal and bolus. That's why it's important for you to recognize which insulins are which. 3 or more to attain glycemic goals, which is usually going to be at least a basal injection daily and 2 or 3 mealtime injections. You must know when meals occur. If you've worked with me with a diabetic at Good Shepherd, one of the things I'm always asking you is when do they eat? When do they take their medicine in relation to their meal? You have to know that. You can't interpret blood sugars unless you know when they ate and when they took their insulin or their medicine. You'll use your knowledge of the onset, peak, and effective duration for the different insulins to determine which insulin is causing hypoglycemia. In most circumstances, basal is going to be 50 to 70%. I'll just tell you, I always start with 70%, and then I move it based on their response. Then the bolus is going to be about 30%, and we divide that 30% of their total daily dose over the different meals. Did they give you a number of carbs to eat per meal?
Yeah, they said stick around 45, but I don't.
Okay.
I do about 30.
Okay. Let's see. Insulin doses based on weight, we've talked about that. In an insulin-sensitive person, what this relationship is built on is that a unit will, 15 grams of carbohydrates will raise your blood sugar about 50 milligrams per deciliter. A unit of insulin will cover that. Will adjust their insulin about every 3 or 4 days. She said they were calling her that day, finding out what her blood sugars are. We'd be doing that on an outpatient basis as well. Okay, so let's go over to the next page, page 5. Let's walk through that example. How much do I have the person weigh? 70, okay, easy. So they come in and they weigh 70 kilos. So the first thing we want to determine is total daily dose of insulin. So it's easy if you do 0.5, then you have 35 units of insulin a day. Total, basal and bolus together, okay? If we take 70% of that, then I usually round this. So this would be about, is that what I have, 25 units? Okay. That becomes the basal dose. So I would have them inject 25, my go-to is Lantus, that's what I like, but you could use others. So I would have them inject 25 units of Lantus daily. So how much does that leave me, 10 units? If that's what I stayed with, I usually adjust it. So I've got 10 units left over in order to do meals. So I can divide it. I can give them, like they did her, is I would give them, here's how many carbs, servings, or grams of carbs I want you to shoot for at each meal. So with her, they did 45, 45, and 45. So how many units of bolus would I need for each of those meals? If they instructed her to do 45 grams per meal of carbohydrates, her insulin to carb ratio is 1 to 15. They need 3 units. So 3, 3, and 3. So that's 9, that's 25, we're close to our 0.5 starting place. Yes?
I don't know if I missed it, but how do you determine the insulin to carb ratio?
We start with 1 to 15.
Okay.
That is pretty average for most folks. And then you'll change from there. If it's not enough, then her blood sugars will be a lot higher. Okay? We're gonna have a test before each meal. Okay, we gave her the goal, you could set the goal differently. The average, the preprandial goal for blood sugar before a meal is 80 to 130.
How'd you get the 45, or how did they come up with the 45?
Okay. Okay, so you've got to estimate their caloric needs.
Okay, that's it. Okay.
How many kilocalories do they need a day? And what did I tell you in terms of carbs should make what percent of their diet? 45 to 65%. So 50% is kind of easy. Let's say the person needed 1,600 calories a day. 50% of that would be 800 calories from carbohydrate. We know that carbohydrate is 4 grams is a kilocalorie, right? 4 kilocalories per gram. So how many does that give us? 200. Okay. Then we would divide it up. So with her, this is 135. This is what we consider what they gave you was minimal intake. We consider you need at least 135 grams of carbohydrates a day for good health based on nutrient intake. So we would divide up those 200 grams over the different meals. Now, I don't know why they lowballed you so much. They may have been just trying to control blood sugar.
Yeah, they just gave me a range, so they
Range.
said probably 60 or so is the highest per meal, but I don't like taking that much insulin,
Okay.
so I kind of made it myself.
So here, what you could do based on that 200 is we could divide it into 60, 60, and 60. I would be basing it on what do you like to eat? So I want to know what you eat for breakfast or what do you eat for lunch? And I would start moving it around. Let's say they ate a lot of carbs for breakfast, but not that many carbs at usually lunch or supper. So these don't have to be even. The more even they are, the more their blood sugar will be evened out, but doesn't have to be. If I use a 1 to 15 insulin to carb ratio, how much insulin do I need for that 60-gram meal? 4. So I could do it that way and have a snack out here of 15 to 30 grams. So here this would be 12 units. And if I still stick with the 25, that's 37 units. How many units per kilo am I at now? 37 units divided by their weight of 70. What is that? It's about 0.6 probably. So I'm in the ballpark. Okay, I just see, okay, tell me where you're lost. To me, it's very logical, but I know it's a lot of information overwhelmed. We can start over and do it again. Where do I lose you?
I think it's just picking like the arbitrary numbers to start with. I don't really know. Are we going to be expected to come up with?
No.
Okay.
No, I would not do that. Okay, so you have to have some sense of how do you estimate calories. There are charts that you can go to. A dietitian, that's one of the reasons why we send them to a dietitian. We can do, sedentary people are about 10 kilocalories per pound. Okay, that's sedentary. Kids will not be that way. More mildly active would be 13 kilocalories per pound. Zane is probably 100 kilocalories per pound. I'm teasing. He's probably in the maybe 1.6 to 2. Okay? So a dietitian, they're going to use Harrison-Benedict equation, or there's a Mifflin-Joran equation, and they'll plug in the values, and they will come up and say, here's estimated calories. If they've lost a lot of weight, they'll add in extra calories to bring that weight back up, okay? So they're gonna start with an estimated caloric need. And based on that need, they'll set and say, you need this many carbohydrates, okay? This percent of your, so I picked 1,600. Came up with 800 calories a day that need to come from carbohydrates. I divide that to get my grams by 4, okay? Then I can say, okay, this person needs to get in 200 grams of carbohydrates a day. I've sat down, I've educated them about what carbohydrates are. I've talked about what does a serving look like, what's 15 grams look like. And so they would give them, like those serving sizes I gave you, they're gonna give that to them. And it's flexible because then they can pick the carb combination that they want for that meal. So 60 grams of carb, what that looks like is a cup of Raisin Bran with a, let's see, a half a cup of milk would be 6, that would be 45, 6, that'd be 51. And then let's say they had juice with it, 4 ounces of juice. That's about 60 that's about 60 grams of carb for breakfast. So that's how we got the amount of carbs needed in a day. We divided it up, and I'm telling you, we just did 60, 60, and 60, but I would do it more for what are you usually eating? Then we use the insulin to carb ratio. 1 unit will cover 15 grams of carb. That got me the basal. I'm sorry, bolus. And it's 12. I'd already decided I was going to give them 25 units of basal. That got me to 37. And I went back and checked myself, and I'm probably at about 0.6 units per kilo. I'm okay with that. That's where I would start. So I'm going to send them out, let them try it for 3 or 4 days, maybe a week. I usually wouldn't go that long. Bring them back in and look at their blood sugars. What'd your blood sugars show up? I'd have them keep a food diary, trying to figure out, can you estimate your carbs? Looking for where were you too low, where were you too high? Did you eat enough carbs? Did you overeat carbs? Did you not count them right? That kind of thing. Okay, now where are your questions?
So when do you give the basal, like the bolus you gave before, when do you tell them to take those 25 units of basal?
Okay, so so I told you take them once a day. With Lantus, you can take it at any time of the day as long as you are consistent.
Okay.
Very often what they will do is they'll give a basal at bedtime or late in the day. To me, the most important thing is consistency. Can you take it that time of day, every day? And then I look to see, does it cause them problems? Do they tend to get low at night? Well, okay, then I'm moving it to midday. My favorite time for Lantus is noon. But I dealt with mostly a non-working population, so that wasn't hard. When do you take your basal?
Every night before bed.
Type 1s, that is very typical, is that's when they'll put it on there, is at bedtime.
So when do they need to take their basal in relation to food?
Don't. You don't have to.
Okay.
Don't have to. Listen to Taylor. Her questions are really good. I've gone over all of this, so be assured that it's back in your notes, but it's good if it's not right on the tip of your tongue. Okay?
So how do you prevent them, I guess, if you're not giving them food, gloves, with that 25 units of, I'm sorry, it was already been, I
No.
haven't given enough thought yet, but.
I'm just looking at the,
Gluconeogenesis from the liver, especially at night.
remember, basal is like this.
Right.
Okay? If you don't eat for 7 or 8 hours, are you still producing insulin? Yes. Do you get low?
No.
No. So basal rarely makes people low.
Okay, so that's why okay.
If you give them 25 units, they are absorbing 1 unit per hour. You put out about a half a unit to a unit per hour. You normal. Okay? So So the bolus have got to be before they eat. If they're a child, we might do it after we've seen how many carbs they've eaten. Michaela told you sometimes their eyes are bigger than her plans, and so you have to match it. Once you've taken it, you gotta come close to what you estimated. Okay? So they're gonna sit down, they're gonna make a meal plan, they're gonna look at their meal and go, okay, the mother might be sitting there going to them, it's 61.5 carbs. But overall, they'll usually start to get where they can estimate it. They're gonna take their insulin, they're gonna check their blood sugar, they're going to inject their bolus, and within 15 minutes, we want them to eat. Okay? If they're too low before a meal, then we'll usually decrease the amount of bolus. So we'll teach them how to take away if they're already too low. Let's say their blood sugar is 80 before they get ready to eat. Well, we might have them subtract a unit. Let's say they're 200 before they eat. We may have them add a unit. I'm not expecting you all to know that. I'm just telling you, here's how you start to adjust. When do you subtract before you eat?
I don't normally subtract, I guess maybe after exercise, but I add, once I go above 150, I add 2 every 50.
Okay. So what she's talking there is a correction dose.
Yeah.
So we have an insulin to carb ratio, and we have an insulin correction dose. That's what she's describing. And there we'll tell them for a blood sugar amount over a certain level, we're gonna have you add so much insulin in increments. Okay, way beyond. Don't worry about it, it's just showing you, here's eventually what you get to. The basics are what I've got in here. So the concepts, so what you need to, the concepts, the takeaways are basal bolus is always what's used. Weight is the basis for the dose. The weight, the unit per kilo is based on age. Okay? Children, adolescents, adults, 3 categories. We figure a total insulin needs. We estimate an amount of caloric intake that's needed. We determine how many carbs we want them to eat. We use the relationship of the 1 unit covering 15 grams of carb to determine the bolus. Okay? Then we send them out. We bring them back shortly. Yes?
This may be a bad question, but like if I have a really high metabolism, so I eat like all the time, or I try to, what if we're calculating the amount of grams of carbs they should eat per meal? I would probably have to eat, I don't know how much I eat, but would I have to decrease my basal insulin and increase my bolus more? Because I would eat more often throughout the day, and I would probably eat more than what the math would suggest. Just theoretically. Because I have to eat like every 2 hours, otherwise like I can't. Because I'm sure a lot of people have the same problem, like both Zayden and I both have high metabolisms. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are type 1 that also have high metabolisms, especially if they're younger.
Okay, so I haven't I've only had a few young men y'all's age. I've dealt more with type 1 men at a little bit older age. I don't know exactly what they would tell you. Here's what I would do if I was having to manage you. If you're not on a pump, you're easier to manage because we can do different patterns of insulin release. But if you're doing an injection, we'd have to move you more to 3 meals a day where you are consuming those carbs. Because we can't have you dosing insulin every 2 hours.
Right.
So what I would probably work you towards is the in-between or higher protein fat intake.
Okay.
To get you in between those carb intakes where we're giving you an insulin.
Okay.
If you're on a pump, we can make a pattern that fits that. We can do a square wave pattern that will give you a little bit of bolus here, a little bit of bolus here, a little bit of bolus here. They're cool, but can't do that with injections.
Okay.
So that would be interesting to ask a dietitian. But that's the only thing I know to do, is to get your carbs into discrete units. And then in between fill in with things that aren't gonna wreck your blood sugar. So in between, I might ask you to eat, let's have you eat nuts. Or peanut butter. Something like that. What do you usually eat for a snack?
Anything I can get my hands on. Clif bars, I like Clif bars, so I eat
Yeah,
those.
okay, so Clif bars are pretty much protein bars, so those, and we could put you on a sensor and have you eat throughout the day and see where your spikes are coming, so we could do that as well.
Okay.
Michaela wears a real-time sensor, so you wanna tell them about that?
Yeah, right now I don't have it on, but I have a Dexcom sensor, so it doesn't give me any insulin or anything, but it'll show me on like a graph what my blood sugar is doing at all times. And it shows me like my target, but then it shows me where I could possibly be, and it moves all the time.
So her sensor has a little catheter that goes into her subcutaneous space, and it measures the amount of sugar that's in her interstitial fluid, okay? And that has to be calibrated back to a blood sugar, and it's a little bit delayed. It's interstitial fluid sugar is always delayed from what is in the bloodstream, but it's close enough. So I don't know what your current screen, in the past they would show you arrows, you're ascending, you're
Yeah.
descending, and you can set a range. Will yours alarm?
Yeah.
So she can set a alarm, what's your alarm set?
At 70,
Yeah.
it'll start going off.
Remember that, because that's good, that's exactly where you want it, because if she starts dipping below that and the slope of her line is pretty fast, so the body looks at how far your blood sugar falls over a period of time. So if you fall from a blood sugar of here to here in this amount of time versus the same amount of fall over this amount of time, the body does not get upset about that. If this happens, then it will set off your epinephrine release, okay? So that's what that Dexcom, or what her sensor is doing, is it looking at rate of time, but it's also looking at where's the blood sugar, and it alarms her to, you need to eat something, okay? So we can use that kind of technology on someone like you. If I was a dietitian, I'd probably know what to tell you, but that does become a real problem. But it's not, it's more, can we satisfy what you'd like to do, but do it to where we can give you insulin at the same time. Other questions? Good questions.
Yeah, I have one for Michaela, actually. So you obviously are, well control your blood sugar. How often how many times have you been hypoglycemic? Like, how often does that occur in someone like you who obviously has great control versus, I guess, someone else, some of your patients who may not have the same amount of control?
They happen probably a couple times a week. I have to like manage my activity. That'll definitely drop it. So if I'm gonna exercise, I'm fine with having my blood sugar be a little bit high so that I don't drop too low. And so I have to just know ahead of time what I'm gonna do. Like tests are hard because I need to make sure I don't drop low during a test. But probably a couple times a week I go low, but I can feel it. So I know when it's gonna happen, kind of, or when it's happening. Because some people don't have the symptoms as
Right.
much, but I feel shaky and anxious, and I can tell.
Something you said I was going to comment on, but I was thinking about the time as well, so I lost it. Okay. Anything else? Did you have anything?
No, thanks for answering.
Anybody have other questions for her? The closer people stay to normal, the more likely they have a low. So that's the danger. That's why we don't have the same treatment goals for a person as we do what is normal. So if you think to other diseases, we correct people to the normal value, don't we? So if we're correcting a sodium or lipids, do we go, oh, you got the disease, we're just gonna let it be higher? We don't do that. But here we have to, because the risk of low is too high. The more lows you have, the less likely you are to feel it the next time. So it takes the body a while to recover from a low neurologically. So we want to keep people from being low. So we'll tolerate a higher value for them to avoid those. Okay, let's take a break. We'll come back at 5 after.